Ms. Malvicini, thank you for your agreeing to this interview. Ms. Malvicini, a national of the United States, joined ADB in 2005 and has held numerous lead positions in operations and communications. Prior to this appointment, she was ADB's Deputy Country Director and Officer in Charge for Uzbekistan. From 2007 to 2014, she worked as a water resource specialist in ADB's South Asia Department, and until 2017, she served as Project Management Unit Head. Ms. Malvicini graduated from Cornell University in New York in 2000 and the Wheaton Graduate School in Illinois in 1988. With your permission, I'd like to start the conversation with a non-standard question. There is a popular saying, God forbid you should live in an era of change. This was exactly the period when you had to lead the ADB mission in Uzbekistan. Massive economic and political reforms, a pandemic, the decline of economic growth, and the global foreign policy tensions. Events are literally happening at lightning speed. So have you ever thought that it would be better to work in a quieter time and the region?
That's a very good question. Absolutely not. Actually, I felt incredibly lucky to have been assigned to Uzbekistan during this period. It was a privilege, actually. I started in January 2018. At that time, as you indicated, everything was changing at lightning speed. There were major institutional changes. That was a little bit dizzying to try to keep up with the pace in which the government was moving. But it was a tremendous opportunity to see the change in even the people. People used to whisper, even in my office, when they'd start to talk about the government. The fear was really changing, and I noticed even life in the streets changed. More people were out enjoying themselves, feeling more free. But also for our work, it became a tremendous open door. All of a sudden, the government administration under His Excellency President Mirziyoyev, they wanted the international advice. So not only are investments on the ground, the construction works to build new roads or water supply or things like this, they wanted the reforms. They wanted to know what they should do. They wanted, and we had the challenge then of advising them how they would sequence things. They also became a little bit more strategic in the way in which they worked. They wanted, I remember in January 2018, President advised every sector to develop a strategy. Maybe he was expecting too short of a turnaround time for preparing that strategy. It was a little unrealistic, but all the development partners were able to get behind our key agencies, the key clients that work in agriculture and in water supply and health and energy, and help them do strategies, help them do better planning. This was mutually very progressive and good relationship. So I feel very lucky, actually, to have come during this time, to have been personally witnessing the transitions and the changes that are for the positive, positive trend and in the interests of the people of Uzbekistan.
What about pandemic? Did pandemic and the lockdown affect bilateral cooperation? Did it cause the disruption of any plans, and how did the parties respond jointly to the fight against the coronavirus?
A pandemic was a challenge for Uzbekistan and everywhere. I was here the entire time, so I actually felt it personally on the life of the people, on myself. And I think that it actually made the partnership with Uzbekistan between ADB and the government and development partners even more close. We banded together. In crises, that's what happens. It unites people. We become all one team to fight this challenge together. And what was interesting was, all of a sudden, we became even more efficient. We moved online quickly, and then we had easier access to each other, because during lockdowns, everybody was just stuck in their homes. And I found that it was easier to access my clients in government, to be able to plan and have meetings and make decisions, etc. So ADB was able to really step up very quickly together with the UN agencies and the other multilateral development banks that are physically present here, like the World Bank, like EBRD and Islamic Development Bank, we became a very close-knit group during that time to help the government to reform. We were able to then give grants for the healthcare system, as well as loans to build the resilience of the sanitary and epidemiological system against future pandemics, because as we see, COVID is not necessarily the last of what we're going to deal with in these. So we need better resilience to those. And then also some budget support that would help the government give subsidies to SMEs, small and medium enterprises, as well as healthcare workers that will help prop up the economy.
The business plan of ADB operation in the country has become strategy for bilateral cooperation in 2019-2023. So could you briefly explain what this document was and how effectively it was implemented?
We call that document a country partnership strategy because it's the partnership between us and the government to support the people of Uzbekistan. So that strategy has one key aim, and that's to help build an inclusive, market-oriented economy. It has three main foci, three main pillars. One is on private sector development. So that's where we've built private sector opportunities into all of our projects, or more importantly, because the government's policy is to not take sovereign guaranteed loans to the extent possible, we have to be able to prove we have to be able to reach out to private sector and determine where we can actually do it through a private sector arm of our agency, or to do a public-private partnership. So for example, we work in water supply and sanitation. So we would, through sovereign guaranteed loans, traditionally rehabilitate a wastewater treatment plant. But last year we were able to tender through a PPP scheme a wastewater treatment plant that will get a company in. They won the tender to do it better. And it takes the burden off of the government, and it will hopefully provide much better service delivery. So private sector development, one aim of our strategy. Second aim is regional cooperation and integration. You may know that we're the secretariat for an intergovernment platform called the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Program, CAREC we call it. This is basically Silk Road countries, everywhere from Mongolia and China all the way to the South Caucasus of Azerbaijan and Georgia. And that is the Silk Road trade route that Uzbekistan is the heart of. And being double landlocked, this is very, very important for Uzbekistan. So under this general pillar, we do a lot of cross-border projects, or we support projects that will connect Uzbekistan with its neighbors and onward to China or the other side of Asia. And then the third area under our strategy is on reducing economic and social disparities. You notice that President and his cabinet travel to the regions a lot, and they're listening to the people. So we're very pleased to see this swing to de-emphasizing Tashkent and Tashkent region and emphasizing the other regions of the countries. So a lot of our projects are aimed to help the regions really develop and help businesses in the region get the connectivity that they need, get the utilities, the service, the reliability, so that they can have a reliable business in a regional area. This strategy is still under implementation. It goes until 2023. So we're just starting the process to self-evaluate how we're doing on that. And then we'll have an independent evaluations branch of ADB that will look at it with a fresh lens. And we'll prepare a new strategy based on the lessons learned of the old one, as well as the new development aims of the country. So one of the pillars of the strategy is private sector development, enhancing that, building the enabling environment for private sector, and then doing more through private entities. The intent of the government is to attract foreign investment to the country and to reduce the projects that are on the state budget. Uzbekistan is actually the largest client of our public-private partnership program. We have about 8 projects ongoing in renewable energy, in water supply and wastewater treatment, solid waste management, healthcare, education, and we're seeing a lot of traction. You may have noticed that there was a recent PPP roundtable supported by the government and ADB, that there was a great success in demonstrating the reforms in the PPP area.
ADB pays special attention to poverty reduction, climate change, gender equality, creation of jobs for women and the vulnerable population. So how do you assess the measures taken by the government of Uzbekistan in this direction, and what joint projects could you specifically mention?
I'm actually really glad to see that the government has emphasized these very important areas. Traditionally, historically, the awareness about climate change has not been that great, even though you've been the recipient of major environmental disasters like the Aral Sea. But the government has recently very much mobilized an agenda in building a green economy and addressing the challenges of climate change. As a development partner, we have to incorporate a climate lens into every project. We're measured by our board of directors on how much our projects help to mitigate or adapt to climate change. On a social side, human capital development, health and education are seen as very important for poverty reduction. I was talking about reducing social and economic disparities. So we have programs that are really looking at the health system, for example, in the regions, the perinatal health, maternity and child health, as well as just primary health care. So a lot of our projects have been working on equipping those polyclinics or the perinatal health center. We have a new project that will focus on that next stage there. And then in gender equality, this is something that is very close to my heart as a woman leader. And I've noticed that there are a lot of challenges in gender equality here in Uzbekistan. It comes even from the family. I wish for Uzbekistan that there would be more empowered women that would go into other key subjects. For example, science, math, engineering, any high-tech kind of subject, the girls are not taking in schools, right? So we have a project that's coming down for approval next year in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math in secondary schools. And I'm really glad to see the Ministry of Public Education has emphasized STEM in its curriculum, in its reforms. But so I hope that that will really boost girls taking these subjects and going into those careers. I would also hope that within families we would have more empowered husbands that will respect women in the workforce, that they would actually partner with their wives to raise the children, so that the women can also be effective career people in society. And then we would have mothers-in-law that would respect the daughters-in-law's potential, and that they would encourage their daughters-in-law to really be out there in the workforce, not just in the traditional sectors like textiles or nursing or teaching, but in some of these sectors where I think they have a lot to contribute to society. In order to reduce poverty, you have to get good quality jobs for the very young population here. Every year, so many graduates graduate from lyceums or secondary school and need good jobs, or even the universities. They have no good job potentials. We did a study back a couple of years ago that influenced a project in technical and vocational education system. The study revealed that there was a gross mismatch between what the employers, what the private sector needs, and what the lyceums and the technical colleges were producing. So this new project really updates the skills areas of these colleges and in universities, so that it's proper vocational education that will give them better opportunities in the job market here, and it will be the labor force that the employers need. The intent of the government and what we're trying to support is that enterprises, small enterprises, can have good labor and that they can grow in their businesses. So SME financing and SME development have been key aims in ADB's pipeline historically. We used to do this just by giving credit lines to SMEs, subsidized rates. Now the banking system has improved so that they can lend to SMEs. And through our private sector arm, we lend to banks. We did a loan to Humcor Bank recently. And Humcor Bank was then able to target that loan to lending to SMEs. So that's one of the aims. Another aim is to build the enabling environment for SMEs to flourish. What are those regulations, those laws, those policies that the government has in place that are actually holding SMEs back from growing? What do they need? What kind of support do they need to actually really build their businesses? So this is something that I think is very, very key to poverty reduction and to building the quality of life here.
Okay, about sectors, the transport sector ranks second in terms of project financing, with 2.3 billion directed to construction of roads and the electrification of railroads. So today Uzbekistan goes beyond the borders of the country to create transnational corridors such as Mazar-i-Sharif, Kabul and Peshawar. To what extent is ADB ready to participate in implementation of this project?
We are very ready to participate in projects that support this regional cooperation and this better connectivity in the interest of Uzbekistan and its neighbors. So where there is political will to do cross-border projects and where that project can be seen as very feasible, then we are ready to support. It's not just that corridor that you mentioned, going through Afghanistan and then to Pakistan and then getting to the sea that way. There are many other corridors for roads and rail that are good. I know Uzbekistan wants to also align with the Kyrgyz and the Chinese to make a rail going toward China. Then there's also what is being talked about now as a middle corridor that really needs to be developed in light of the current geopolitical tensions in the region. It's shown that there's great potential to go from China through Central Asia to Europe, through the Caspian Sea and then onwards to the Black Sea and the rest of Europe. That's an area where we're studying more to see where the costs can decrease, where there could be some changes at border points to reduce the time and the cost for freight and for cargo in general to go that direction. I've experienced this very personally now because I'm looking to move to Manila, Philippines, and I need to ship my goods, my personal goods. And I'm finding that Uzbekistan truly is very double landlocked. And the routes to get my goods through to Manila are very convoluted. I've had shipping companies that propose sending my goods through Latvia and through Lithuania to get down and around all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It's a very long, intensive process, and but you know it's rather costly. So it would be better that Uzbekistan is able to really develop these trade routes better. And we stand ready to support that with studies and analysis, with having the platform under the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Program for working groups that exist on rail, on road, to really talk country to country about how they can facilitate this kind of connectivity.
In April's Asian Development Outlook annual report, the ADB projected a GDP growth slowdown to 4%, arguing that investment and remittance inflows had declined. However, their volume rose sharply to $2.54 billion in the first 4 months. In April, individuals sent to Uzbekistan record $1.07 billion, twice as much as last year. As a result, the country's economy has demonstrated not only a resistance to large-scale external changes, but also the positive dynamic of GDP growth by 5.8% against 2.6% in the first quarter of 2021. Can we expect an increase in original projected 4% due to these factors, or do you see that this is a temporary trend that will not have a significant impact on economic growth?
So as you rightly noted, the study that we did, the outlook, the projections, were done in April. That was the beginning of the current geopolitical crisis. And so our prognosis was a little bit dire. We were expecting a decrease in growth this year. And as you rightly noted, Uzbekistan is doing better than expected. So this is great. However, there are still risks. As we're feeling here, living in the country, inflation is increased, food prices have increased. This could impact how people spend and how it affects the economic growth. So we could still see an effect on consumption. We also see that we don't know about the state of the crisis it is. We have about 1 million of the Uzbek population that are registered as working abroad. We're not sure about how long their jobs will last. Some have already come back. We're not sure if they can get good jobs here. So this is a little bit unknown at the moment. We can hope that as Uzbekistan demonstrated in 2020, when growth decreased but didn't go into the negative, they did not go into a recession, Uzbekistan rebounded very well in 2021. So we can hope that the Uzbekistan economy is resilient. We are there to support the good policies that the government does have in place to make sure that the economy stays robust and strong. And we will revise our projection later in the year when we know a little bit more.
In the portfolio of ADB investments in Uzbekistan, the sphere of information and communication technologies is placed on the last line. There are almost no projects in this direction. Also, we see that there is a boom in the development of this sector now. Is it because the ADB considers investing in the digital economy risky, or is it because there was no projects that meet the bank's requirements?
So neither, actually. There's a third reason. Digitalization is a key emphasis or a key strategic pillar for ADB right now in the effort to build back better after COVID. Remember what happened when we were all on lockdown? What do? We all went quickly online. Yeah. We developed new ways of doing business that were actually quite efficient, right? I was saying that we could have access to each other even more when we could have a Zoom call or an MS Teams call, and we didn't have to travel to each other's offices and wait for each other's schedules. So digitalization is now mainstreamed throughout all of our projects. We're asked by our board of directors, what is this project doing toward digitalization, toward more digital economy? Even though you don't see that in the titles of the projects, we're incorporating that into our projects. For example, this STEM project, Science, Technology, Engineering, Math project that I was indicating, that will have ICT labs in it. It will have a full ICT component in that, a thrust toward not just relying on textbooks, but relying on digital resources. In our TVET program, it also is incorporating this. The new perinatal health project that I was mentioning, that specifically is to digitalize the medical records of the perinatal centers, these clinics, so that they can go into the national medical system. And there can be much more integration between the primary health care and then the hospitals, the tertiary health care that receive them. They can see the medical records online. So I don't think that it's a matter of not important. It's incredibly important now, and we want to mainstream it in all of our projects.
How is the system of control over the intended use of funding allocated? I mean, how does ADB control those funds are used for their intended purpose? How does ADB combat corruption in this system?
I'm really glad you asked me that question, because I think that this is a question that should be spoken of much more openly. And it's the first time actually in 4 years that a reporter has asked me that directly. So thank you. Anti-corruption, integrity are very, very important for ADB. And we want to combat this perception that our funds, just because we lend to the government and we work through the government, that means that the funding doesn't reach the intended beneficiaries or the intended benefits. So there are two key areas that we assess very carefully when preparing a project, and during implementation we monitor those. Those are in financial management and in procurement. Okay? So in financial management, we have to assess the capacity, the government agency to which we're using to follow good accounting standards. And we've been moving all of our projects and our executing agencies to international financial reporting system and those standards. Then we do audits during the project. We do spot checks. We require that each project has an independent audit on the use of the funds. And we point out, or the auditor will point out, where there were funds that coming from the loan that we gave or the grant that we gave that were not for the project intended purposes. And we correct those things. Secondly, and probably more importantly, is procurement. So in all of our projects, there'll have to be experts that are engaged, consulting services firms. There'll have to be construction companies that are procured. There'll have to be equipment that is bought under the project. We have a very robust system or policy on procurement. And it's a very intensive amount of steps that go through where we check what the government is doing, and they have to follow our system, not a government system in that. And then we also do audits on that. We make sure that it's done in a fair, transparent, open way, that there's value for money, that the contractors or the consultants that were technically qualified actually are the ones that are engaged under the projects. But it doesn't stop there, because this, what I just described, is a system. No system, no procedure is foolproof. You can always have clever people that know how to work around such a system. So what we want, and what I'd like to encourage your viewers on, is people that actually watch our projects, that notice maybe something that's happening on the ground. If you see that there's equipment that is not of good quality, then that's probably a problem, because the technical specifications in the bidding document would have made sure that it would have been of a good standard. If you suspect that someone working on our projects has done some misrepresentation of their, maybe they misrepresented their experience, then there's a key email address that everybody needs to remember. It's called integrity@adb.org. Integrity.adb.org has, it's not, I don't receive that. No one in my office sees that. It's a very confidential mechanism to go to our investigation unit. It's an anti-corruption and integrity unit that will take any allegations anonymously. You can be anonymous. You don't need to even mention your name. If you give them some type of evidence of your allegation, you can help them to investigate, then we will look very much into that. We have cases in Uzbekistan where this mechanism has been used and quite effective. And we found that there have been cases of firms that have misrepresented themselves, and they have been sanctioned. So it does work. I encourage it to be used more. I encourage open and transparent conversation with stakeholders. We're trying to, when we go into the field for review missions where we supervise a project, we're trying to reach out to more stakeholders then within civil society. So please do approach us if you think that you would like to be more engaged in our projects and watching them. And let's make sure that we address the issues as we see them.
ADB is now developing a new business plan for 2022-2024. What new projects will be included? Will be overall financing package increase?
So we have already increased our overall resources to Uzbekistan, both in financial terms and in human resources. During my period, my office has actually doubled in the amount of national staff that I have, and we're getting good professionals, good Uzbeks to work on in our staff. And the envelope for financing is about $1 billion a year in new financing, but knowing that the government has a strict debt limit, external financing limit, which we support, then we also work within that, and we try to move more to our PPP or our non-sovereign windows that don't have to necessarily have government guarantee. But to answer your question, we have a lot of exciting projects in the works in all key sectors of the economy. We will increase our support in human capital development. So you'll see us do more health and education projects in the future. This is a policy of this present administration, and we're being asked to do more to support that. You'll see more in climate adaptive work, in doing more things that look at adapting to climate change, be it renewable energy or even in water resources, irrigation. You'll see more of water supply and sanitation projects, but even from a national perspective, to get smart water meters involved in our water supply so that they can measure the water resources and control the losses more in the system. You'll see more of working with each of the government agencies to reform them. For example, Uzbekistan unbundled a couple of years ago into generation, transmission, and distribution. But the companies are still evolving. They're still improving themselves. So you'll see us working in transmission and distribution with those companies to improve their corporate governance, to get international experts on their boards, to have good HR functions, to have good audit and risk management functions. So these are things that are not so tangible because they don't see them on the ground, but this is that advice that I was talking about earlier, and that's embedded in our projects.
When reading your CV, I came across a very interesting detail. You are a qualified specialist in the field of water resource management. You worked for the New York State Water Resource Institute, where you made agreements between upstream communities and the municipality of New York. This topic is very relevant to our region too, because in the recent past, it has been the cause of disputes and the conflicts between downstream and the upstream states. But now the dialogue between the states is not from a position of force or threats, but to find compromises and points for cooperation. This is one of the key initiative of President Mirziyoyev. What assessment as an expert can you give to the work carried out in this direction?
It's really excellent that the President drastically improved the relationships with the neighbors. And in the sphere of water resources, it's so important. So as I noticed in that job that you indicated, there was a lot of kind of hard feelings between the upstream communities that had to supply the water to New York City, because a lot of them had been involuntarily moved from their houses to build reservoirs and things like this. And when you have these negative memories, it's hard to overcome them. So I'm very pleased to see that a lot of the old relationship and old struggles that the countries had between each other are fading away gradually. I was just 2 weeks ago in Tajikistan for this International Water Conference, and I saw that firsthand in the cooperation that was there, the dynamism that was there. I'm seeing that Uzbekistan and its neighbors are working very collaboratively together on hydropower projects, for example, on things that will give mutual benefits, like Uzbekistan needing power in the summer and Tajikistan being able to give that power through a hydropower plant, for example, and Uzbekistan being able to share its power in the winter with those countries, those neighbors that rely on hydropower and have power shortage in the winter. So it's not just about water, it's about this water energy nexus. And I think that there's a lot of progress that is being made in that Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation platform. It has now a water pillar. It traditionally only focused on trade and energy and transport, but now in light of the improved relationships between the neighbors, we've added a platform to really discuss regional water issues. There are other platforms that exist for regional water. And in my talking with people, everyone is much more hopeful now that we can avoid environmental disasters like the Aral Sea. We can have mutual win-win solutions in cooperation, and we can improve the economies in livelihoods of all the countries in the interest of the greater good in Central Asia.
Thank you. Ms. Malvicini, can you share with your future plans after Uzbekistan?
Well, the good news is I get to still work in Uzbekistan. So I'm moving back to our headquarters in Manila, Philippines, and I'm part of the management team that will work on Uzbekistan, all of Central Asia, plus the Caucasus of Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, and Pakistan and Afghanistan. So these regional issues will be even more at the forefront. But I get to look after Uzbekistan and our work there, make sure that we have a very competent team that can respond to the people and the government in a timely and effective way.
Ms. Malvicini, thank you for your time and interesting answers. I wish you good luck, and we hope to see you again in Uzbekistan.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.